Casey Kenney is just another example of an MMA fighter turned into a piece of shit. For those who aren't aware, Casey Kenney is a 33-year-old MMA fighter who used to fight in the UFC's bantamweight division and had a record of 16-4, and at one point was considered a prospect. However, recently Casey was arrested on a multitude of charges. Casey faces a total of 6 charges consisting of assault, aggravated assault, and kidnapping, and if he is convicted and found guilty of these, a minimum he could get 4 years and up to a maximum of 12.5 years. And like I said before all of this, Casey Kenney was considered a UFC prospect, so let's go through his MMA career. Starting with Casey Kenney's MMA career, he was able to rack up a record of 6 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw before he reached the Dana White Contender Series. Casey made 2 appearances on the Dana White Contender Series. On that first appearance, he was able to pick up a win against CJ Hamilton. However, when he came back for his second appearance, he lost against Adam Antolin. After this, Casey Kenney had to go back to the regional scenes where he was able to pick up 4 victories, and one of those victories was against flyweight contender Brandon Royval. Obviously, that win has aged quite well for Casey Kenney and was the most noticeable name out of those 4 victories. Due to picking up 4 victories in the regional scene, Casey Kenney made his way to the UFC, where on his debut he took on UFC veteran Ray Borg. And Casey was able to pick up a victory against Ray Borg on his UFC debut. However, most media scorecards did score it for Ray Borg 29-28. After winning on his UFC debut, he would go on to win his next fight against Manny Bermudez, but then the fight after this, he got absolutely dominated by a certain Merab Dvalishvili. He got absolutely dominated in this fight. But then in the same year, Casey Kenney was able to bounce back and pick up 3 victories, and the most notable name on those 3 victories was Nathaniel Wood in a very close fight. And after picking up these 3 victories, he was scheduled to take on UFC legend Dominick Cruz, and this would be a big test for Casey Kenney, and if he beat Dominick Cruz at this time, he would have burst through the rankings and would have got a bigger name to fight next. And going into his fight against Dominick Cruz, Casey Kenney was able to put himself into some controversy after he made these comments against UFC fighter Megan Anderson.
Did you smash Megan Anderson or no, Casey?
Probably not, man. She's not too well.
Be honest.
I mean, if it came down to it, and it was like
You're
5 a.m. for she's a 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. or just
She's
us
all,
2 hanging out.
She's piggybacking you to her room.
Yeah, I'd be like, fuck it. Listen.
Due to this, Megan Anderson wasn't happy with what Casey Kenney said about her and went on to Twitter to blast and shame Casey Kenney, to which she replied and apologized to her. And to make it a bit awkward, both Megan Anderson and Casey Kenney were scheduled to have fights on the same card. We then get to the biggest fight of Casey's career when he takes on Dominick Cruz, and he loses. Dominick Cruz was able to pick up his first win in 5 years, and he was able to beat Casey Kenney in a very fun fight, an entertaining fight, and it was vintage Dominick Cruz. He had a lot of moments in this fight, and Casey Kenney wasn't able to pick up the victory. After this, Casey would go on to have his last fight in the UFC, where he took on Song Yadong and also lost in his last fight in the UFC. And that was the rundown of Casey Kenney's MMA career / UFC career, and is more than likely forever going to be the end of his MMA career. I'll be honest, I don't see Casey Kenney ever being able to make a return to the UFC or MMA in general. I don't think he'll set foot into the octagon again, but I suppose you never know. It's not like the UFC have turned away criminals in the past. There's multiple criminals working under the UFC, unfortunately, but here's hoping that Casey Kenney isn't able to get a job with the UFC again. But thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.